Good to see you, everyone. My name is Robbie Howell, and today we are returning to West Africa, a part of the world I haven't tackled since the very early days of my channel. In so doing, we will be checking out one of the most prominent West African powers the world has ever seen, a major omission of my original dabblings in the region, none other than the SONGHAI, a cavalry and naval civilization, as well as one of the most commonly requested civs that I have been asked to cover on this channel. As always, a big shout out to my mod squad for consulting with me on the feasibility of various bonuses and mechanics I have proposed here. As always, before we dive in, a very brief summary of my approach. I focus on historical authenticity in Age of Empires 2, trying to be truer to history than the game currently is, while still focusing on capturing the feel of a civilization within the confines of the game. I try not to step on existing civilization's toes, and I'm going for what is actually possible to mod into the game. So if you see something that isn't possible, let me know, and if you want to see me push the boundaries, skip to the LAVAnte-Garde section at the end of the video. I am a hobbyist, not a historian, so I need to simplify and summarize a lot, and I get stuff wrong all the time. If you want to see my sources, check out the speaker notes of this slide presentation linked down below. All images credited likewise in the speaker notes of whatever slide they appear on. If you want to support me, please leave a comment whether you like the build, you have a history note, you want to voice a concern, or anything else. And also, I would greatly appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. As all the YouTube channels love to say, join the Discord linked down below. We have some great conversations. And if you're feeling generous and have a buck to spare, you can support me down on Ko-Fi, link in the description below as well. And with that, let's proceed to a summary of the SONGHAI. Who exactly were they? Well, the SONGHAI are the head of an amalgamation of West African ethnic groups. They formed a very powerful empire from the mid-1400s to late 1500s AD and inherited much of the dynasty left behind by Mali, as well as being a major contributor to the downfall of the Mali Empire in its latter days. They were centered at the city of Gao on the Niger River in modern-day Mali, very close to the border with Niger, and the SONGHAI Empire itself formed along the Niger River, claiming other major ports along it like Timbuktu and Djenné in its later years. The SONGHAI themselves were more of a ruling elite, a small minority within their own empire, but still undoubtedly its power core. They likely had migratory origins and subjugating the local tribes such as the Gao themselves, the Sorko, the Do, and many others with their substantial military might. Islam was much later introduced to the region in around 1000-ish AD and emerged as a religion of the upper class by at least 1019. The SONGHAI people themselves, as the ruling elite of the area, largely adopted Islam, while many of the other tribes and ethnic groups underneath them retained loyalty to West African animism well into the days of the SONGHAI Empire and beyond. The clash between Islam and West African animism was very prominent within the SONGHAI Empire, as was it in many other African nations of the time, but is not something that this build heavily focuses on. Now, to do a bit of a history summary, we first joined the SONGHAI at the formation of the Gao Empire sometime in the 700s AD, contemporary to Ouagadougou, or the Ghana Empire, as you may call it, here represented on the map by the ensign of my old Soninke build. Go check that out up here. I originally called it the Ouagadougans. The Gao Empire, while it was very small and largely confined to Gao and a couple of surrounding settlements, was quite influential and had a major stranglehold on trade along a big chunk of the Niger River. Even in these early days, Gao had a fairly substantial freshwater navy and also was very, very wealthy, using its navy to secure its interests, facilitate trade. However, many hundreds of years later, in the late 1300s, the Gao Empire was conquered by Mali. Though this happened towards the tail end of the Mali Empire's dominance, meaning that Gao, given its wealth and its relative distance from the core of the Mali heartland, actually retained a good amount of autonomy despite being subjugated. Its trade power was diminished, but it was never completely dominated. And because of this, when Mali started to collapse, Gao capitalized on their weakness and regained independence in about 1440-ish AD, less than 100 years after it was initially conquered. And not only did it regain its independence, it started to chew up as much territory as it possibly could, with the SONGHAI Empire established in about 1464, making big territorial gains by swallowing up big pieces of the Mali Empire just as it was crumbling. They pushed back the Mosei to the south in about 1471 on the back of these major western territorial gains. If you want to see my build for the Mosei, go take a look up there. And they also established a near monopoly on West African trade, especially along the Niger River, even more so than the Mali Empire itself had. The Songhai were in a great position, and the only thing they needed was access to the sea to completely seal the deal and own West Africa for all of time. But unfortunately, they weren't allowed to do that. The Portuguese had established some notable colonies and alliances with powers along the coast, and they denied the Songhai access to the sea, instead being forced to push southeast into Hausaland, part of northern modern-day Nigeria. Now, in 1494, there was a major usurpation within the Songhai Empire that absolutely rocked it to its core. However, it did not capsize. Instead, the usurping dynasty managed to actually consolidate a lot of the gains that the empire had made previously and brought it to its apex in the early 1500s AD, spanning from Senegal near the shores of the Atlantic all the way to the shores of Lake Chad in the east. That is an enormous amount of territory. However, as we so often see in these presentations, this would mark the beginning of the end. A string of weak rulers began to plague the empire in the mid-1500s. Not only were there constant civil wars brought on by bad succession laws that divided the empire and caused its border states to be lost, but a war began with the powerful Moroccan Empire in the late 1500s. On screen right now, represented inaccurately by the Saracens ensign. This war would mark the death knell to the Songhai, with counterproductive Songhai military practices plus Moroccan use of gunpowder and mercenaries leading to numerous noteworthy defeats, culminating in the absolutely disastrous Battle of Tondibi in 1591, where a 10-to-1 outnumbered Moroccan force absolutely decimated some of the best Songhai troops available at the time, and the rest of the empire rolled over and died not long thereafter. It finally collapsed just before 1600 AD, with the Moroccans absorbing many of the remaining pieces. However, the Songhai were not out for good. In fact, the Songhai retained a small but noteworthy independent kingdom right up into the 1900s AD, and the Songhai people are still prominent in West Africa to this very day, as do the many ethnic groups that once made up the bulk of their mighty empire. With this history context, let us proceed to the flavor, the lovely aesthetic details that make Age of Empires civilizations special. For one, their language would be Songhai. What a surprise! I should note there are many, many Songhai sub-languages. Fufo, ladies and gentlemen. Their ensign, based on Sahel quilted barding. This style of cavalry armor was incredibly famous within this part of Africa for a pretty decent chunk of history, and arguably the Songhai had the most iconic use of it. So the pattern and the texturing that I used were based on the image that you see on screen right now, though of note this specimen is, I think, from a couple hundred years after the downfall of the Songhai Empire, but there is substantial evidence that they used very similar stuff at the time. Additionally, their architecture would be African, what a surprise, and their wonder would be the Sankore Madrasa. This is one of a number of very famous Islamic structures built during the Songhai Empire. I believe this one is based in Timbuktu. There's a couple of other great options you could pick, but this one to me felt the most interesting, iconic, and distinct from the current Malian wonder. Their castle, it's a bit messier. I went with this old photo of the Sidi Yahya Mosque, which I believe is also in Timbuktu. This is obviously a very old photo, but I think is closer to how it would have looked when initially constructed under Songhai occupation. And if you wanted, you could blend in elements that I found in this Portuguese sketch of Timbuktu that was also, again, made in like the 1800s. So both anachronistic, both not perfect, but I really couldn't find anything better, and maybe you could cobble together something that was at least slightly authentic based on these two images. From here, let's talk about their campaign. There are two amazing contenders for a Songhai campaign. It was really hard to choose, but eventually I ended up going with Sunni Ali. He was the first great Songhai leader who led their mighty expansion and founded the empire itself in the mid-1400s, mopping up the remainder of the Malians, fighting a jihad against the Mosei in the south, as well as facing the Tuaregs and the Fulani, who are not currently in the game, but should be. I will note, though, like I said, there's another really good contender, that being Askia Muhammad I, also known as Askia the Great. He was the one who actually usurped Sunni Ali's son and managed to stabilize the empire despite this massive shift in its dynamic, going on to bring it to its heights. Of note, Askia Muhammad I was a devout Muslim and was actually a military commander under Sunni Ali himself, whereas Sunni Ali, while a Muslim on paper, often persecuted Muslims for political gain and definitely had major sympathies towards West African animism, and as such, he is often portrayed as a massive monster and villain in a lot of contemporary Islamic sources. But despite that, I think that his role as a founder and the variety of civilizations that he fought against give him the slight edge in my book between the two. Though if you went with Askia Muhammad I, I would not fault you whatsoever. If you want to see some ideas for AI player names, take a look on screen right now. I'm not going to go through them in detail because from here, it's time for us to talk about major themes. Whenever I research the history for a civilization, I try to find major overarching through lines that I then use to determine my design. And as always, for the Songhai, I've determined 3. First and foremost, the Niger River. How can a river be a theme? Oh, believe me, the Niger River is synonymous with the Songhai Empire and earlier Gao. Not only did the Niger allow them to monopolize trade, rapidly transport troops to reinforce their borders, and also facilitate general interconnectedness of their empire overall, but they also had the largest freshwater navy in Africa and possibly in the world at the time to facilitate this total dominance. And so because of this essential element of the Niger River, I wanted my Songhai build to have a great navy, as well as a broad emphasis on trade and mobility, or rather, as you'll see, markets specifically. Next, an elite military. As mentioned, the Songhai originated as a ruling military elite, and their soldiers had a fearsome reputation even before their empire was founded. They were the first West African state with a full-time professional army founded by Askia Muhammad I, and they ran circles around their enemies. They had a lot of sophisticated military tactics, and they were way ahead of their time, especially in Africa, with their study of military science, making them an absolute force to be reckoned with. Additionally, courage among soldiers was highly rewarded. Dying rather than retreating was pretty much considered the norm, especially among the crack troops of the army themselves, though this ended up kind of biting them in the ass at the Battle of Tondibi, when many of their soldiers, their best, their finest elite soldiers, sat on their shields and awaited death rather than retreat. But even so, it helped them win many, many battles before then. And so because of this elite military theme, I wanted this build to have great elite units with good variety and some really interesting micro-intensive options to allow players to flex their strategic muscles. Thirdly, armored cavalry. They were famed for horse breeding. I feel like I've been saying that a lot with my builds recently. First the Jurchens and the Khitans, and which you can check out up here, and now these guys. But they were known for it well before their empire was founded. Their cavalry were especially feared among their many fine soldiers, and they served many roles between melee heavily armored elites and ranged lightly armored javelin cavalry levies. The Songhai's origins as likely being a migratory warrior clan definitely laid the groundwork for the cavalry mastery that they would be known for in future. And they also, of course, made extensive use of the iconic heavy padded barding that I mentioned earlier, though again, this was well known across the entire Sahel region. So because of this, I wanted them to have awesome cavalry with a lot of strong options and better defenses than normal. And with that, we come to the end of the history section for this Songhai build. If that's all you were here for, thank you so much for watching. And for those of you who, like me, love Age of Empires and want to see what I have done with this build, let's move on to civ design, beginning with an overview and a summary of their bonuses. The Songhai, a cavalry and naval civilization. First bonus, villagers can drop resources at markets with plus 5% yields. This is meant to represent their, of course, their trade dominance, like I keep talking about, but also their general economic prosperity, which, among many other things, was partially facilitated by the proliferation of small local marketplaces. This is their core economic bonus. I think it's quite a good one, and even if it's not going to be the sort of thing you can do every single time you need to place down a drop camp due to markets being a lot more expensive and a lot bigger and bulkier, it is something that in many cases is going to get you a really nice little resource advantage. Second bonus, shipwright costs minus 33% and is available in Castle Age. This is, of course, representing their hegemony over the Niger River and their vast fleet of war canoes, which were smaller vessels, quicker and cheaper to make than a lot of the large blue water warships you'd see elsewhere in the world, hence why I felt like them being cheaper and easier to mass up was a good bonus for this civilization. This is one of 2 core water bonuses that they have by default, and even if it's not something that will help you from the get-go, is something that is going to give you a great power spike if you can afford it come Castle Age, and even if not, it'll kick in early Imperial and allow you to really get a big upper hand on water. Third bonus, mounted units benefit from gambesons. This is, of course, referencing the iconic quilted cavalry armor that I keep banging on about. And even though that's just +1 pierce armor gated behind a technology, we know how important pierce armor breakpoints are. The Songhai do have fully upgraded paladins, and this will make those paladins just that little bit harder to take down with arbalests in post-Imperial Age, while also giving them many other benefits like for camel raiding, or Castle Age knight play, or even in Trash Wars, as we will get to in not too long. Lastly, their team bonus is that their stables and docks are built 100% faster, twice as fast. Now, once again, the docks represent the rapid spread along the Niger River. I think that's a very appropriate bonus for this. And the stables, again, represents their horse husbandry tradition, as well as camel husbandry, I should add. We'll get more into the details of how these bonuses could affect their gameplay and overall strategy later, but before then, let's touch upon their uniques, beginning with their unique unit, the Wuragu Zenyi. This is a medium cavalryman trained at the castle for 25 food and 85 gold, a very lopsided cost. It is quick, it's deadly, and it debuffs enemy attack while in a group. The stats are as follows. It has slightly better HP than a light cav, but slightly worse than a knight. It's notable also for having a very high melee attack, kind of like a Lightus, as well as good rate of fire, and also being very, very fast, though it has 0 pierce armor. Of note, it also is uniquely weak to gunpowder, taking +10 damage in reference to the Battle of Tondibi. Now, they also have a special ability where each Wuragu Zenyi emits an aura that debuffs the attack of all enemies within 7 tiles by 0.1%. Teeny. But this stacks up to 20 times. So if you have 20 Wuragu Zenyi in a group, enemies within all of their aura radii will have -2 attack. Oh, only -2. No. -2 means a lot in Age of Empires. This can bring critical breakpoints into play, especially for ranged units, though of course you have to get close enough for your aura to affect them first. Now, if you want to compare this unit to the Lightus, which I think is the closest comparison that you can aptly make, on the pro side, it is faster and it's better versus low-armored units than a Lightus, as well as being cheaper overall and quicker to train. But it is worse versus high-armored units. It's way more gold intensive, it has much less HP, and it is weak to gunpowder. So the two units are at a pretty nice even point. And that's not even taking into account the Wuragu Zenyi's powerful aura. Now, I should note the name Wuragu Zenyi is roughly translated to golden bracelet. These golden bracelets were a major part of Songhai military tradition. They were given to soldiers who proved their courage in battle and displayed proudly as like a mark of their courage and honor. Additionally, that debuffing special ability is in reference to the clattering of weapons that was used by Songhai cavalry to intimidate enemies. And it was one of the many attributes that made them so feared, hence why this clattering aura debuffs attack and makes people less willing to fight them. The Wuragu Zenyi upgrades to Elite in Imperial Age for 900 food, 500 gold, relatively cheap upgrade cost. It gains the following stat buffs, plus 15 HP, which is pretty substantial, plus 2 line of sight, minus 3 seconds of training time, so they're easy to mass, plus 1 attack, and plus 50% aura stacking, meaning that if you have 30 of them, you get minus 3 attack debuff, which again is really, really significant. But again, you need 30 of them, and they can be picked off pretty easily because even though they get okay HP by Imperial Age, they still don't have fantastic armor. Though, of course, Gambesons helps out. With that, we go on to their unique technologies. The Castle Age unique technology for the Songhai is called Balama, and this gives camels and genitors plus 33% bonus damage. Yes, these guys get genitors. We'll talk about them a little later. This costs 300 food and 400 gold, and the 33% is rounded up. So, for example, elite genitors go from having plus 5 attack versus archers to plus 7. The Balama were the name of like the military governors and army chiefs that were posted on the frontier during the height of the Songhai Empire. They are kind of in charge of keeping the borders under control, and as such, having this tech buff up fast, irregular units more likely to be deployed in small-scale conflicts on the verges of their society felt appropriate. Additionally, I also wanted this to affect bonus damage to kind of bundle into the Songhai emphasis on military science and strategy, because bonus damage is one of the best ways to represent that in Age of Empires 2. The Imperial Age unique technology is called Hikoi. This makes docks provide plus 10% movement speed and attack speed to nearby ships, and towers provide the same to cavalry. Hikoi costs 400 wood and 600 gold, and the effect would have a 12-tile radius for docks, even better than a Centurion fully upgraded, and a 9-tile radius for towers, slightly less than a Centurion. Hikoi were the masters of the water, the Grand Admiral in charge of the fleet on the river Niger, but also, they had such importance and were so essential to the Songhai Empire that they also had authority over all regional governors, including the Balama. In terms of the effect, it is, as I've described many times, referencing the hegemony over the river Niger, allowing troop transport to take place very rapidly, and also making the Songhai soldiers fight better when overseen in this way. Also, spamming docks between your incentive to do so here and the faster build speed fits so well with their extensive occupation along the Niger and development of riverside settlements that it just felt like too perfect not to have something that really incentivized them to do this. As the Songhai, you want your side of the map to be littered in docks, just like they did in history. With these uniques all in mind, let's lastly touch upon regionals. The Songhai have 3 regional units, one of which is brand new, that being the Jali. The Jali is a monk unit trained at the castle for 20 food and 80 gold. They cannot convert or hold relics, but they benefit from sanctity and fervor, though the Songhai do not have sanctity. The Jali would have the following stats: much better HP and better speed than a monk, as well as better training time, but worse line of sight. They can heal just like a monk, but they have double range, 8 range, which lets them heal from very far away. And moreover, they have 2 auras, both of which are non-stacking and have an 8-tile radius. For one, +1 attack to infantry and cavalry, not cavalry archers though. Secondly, +5% work rate to villagers. Now, Jali were known by many names in West Africa. In English, we normally use the word griot for them, but that is actually, I believe, of Portuguese origin. I think it's a Portuguese translation of an African word, and Jali is a more appropriate, actually indigenous word in the Mande language. Though again, the Songhai had their own name for the Jali as well. Jali were bards, for want of a better term, an incredibly important part of West African culture in all its various incarnations. They had major governmental roles as advisors and diplomats and negotiators and record keepers, but they were most famous for being powerful orators and would often play parts in African history by sparking soldiers and leaders to great deeds. Hence why they get an attack buff to infantry and cavalry, whereas the work rate bonus is to reflect their role in government. The Jali would be available to the existing Malians, as well as the Soninke and Mosei, and pretty much any other West African build that enters the game would also receive the Jali in its roster. A very powerful unit with some really interesting implications. Nextly, they get both the Camel Scout and the Genitor. Yes, the Camel Scout I am broadening out from its humble origins with the Gojars. It would serve as the starting scout to any civilization with access to it unless specified otherwise, and the Songhai are no exception. They would start the game with a Camel Scout. The Genitor would also work exactly like it does now. Both of these would function identically to how they are now, and availability to other civilizations will be specified in future videos. But for now, just know, Camel Scout, Genitor, my plan is to make them regional, and the Songhai would get both. Now, let's move on to a summary of the Songhai tech tree, going through some grades, Spirit of the Law style. Infantry, it's a B. They have a unique incentive to get gambesons, which is nice, and they have a very good infantry tree, only lacking arsons and essentially plate mail armor, though the Jali does help them out a little bit. So overall, I think a B is fair. Archers, it's a B+. They don't have elite skirm, which sucks, and they don't have thumb ring, which hurts as well, nor hand cannoneer, nor heavy cav archer, but they do have elite genitors that are fully upgraded and uniquely benefit from both Balama and Gambesons, meaning that they have some of the best anti-archer genitors in the game, bar none. Also, their genitors benefit from Hikoi, allowing them to move faster near towers. So overall, with good arbalesters, only missing thumb ring, and mighty elite genitors, they totally deserve a B+. Next, cavalry. It's an A. Their stables are built faster. They have an absolutely perfect tree besides the Hussar, which they miss. They have the Wuragu Zenyi, they have the Jali. Both of their unique technologies benefit cavalry, and their cavalry benefit from Gambesons. It is a slam dunk A. If they had Hussar, it would be S tier, and I think it would be broken. From here, Siege, it's a C+. They do have Siege Onager, which is nice, but they miss pretty much everything else. And so while having Siege Onagers is kind of helpful, they don't get much support otherwise, and as such I feel a C+ is fair. Depending on how much you like Siege Onagers, you could maybe consider buffing this up to a B-. Their defenses are also a B-. While they do have an incentive to build keeps in late game with Hikoi, they do lack a bunch of very useful defensive technologies. No architecture, no hoardings, ow, no fortified wall can hurt, and essentially no siege engineers, which I mentioned earlier, as well as no bombard tower. So overall, defenses, they got some okay stuff, but I can't really give it higher than a B-. Next, their navy. It is an A-. They build their docks faster, and while they do miss galleon, they do get shipwright earlier and cheaper, and the only other thing they miss is the cannon galleon. Hikoi is obviously a great benefit as well, but I will note, as we will get to momentarily, they have wood issues, and as such, if they didn't have these wood issues, I'd give this an A for sure, as is I give it an A-. It's a very scary navy if you can get the economy behind it that it needs. Speaking of which, economy. It is a B. They have a great economic tech tree. They have the Jolly helping with economy. Their markets obviously give you some extra yields, which has the potential to be really powerful, but the Songhai's crippling weakness is that they miss Bowsaw. Yes, their wood eco is poo. That really hurts, especially because you want wood for your navy, you want wood to spam docks and stables, you want wood to build markets everywhere, and you won't always have it. And so if the Songhai had Bowsaw, I'd bring this up to like an A-, maybe a B+, but without Bowsaw, it is a B. They have great options in every other way. And lastly, their monks. It's a C-. They don't have sanctity or redemption, and without those two things, monks are pretty bad. So you'll make them sometimes, but normally you won't. I guess I could have thrown the Jolly in here as well, because that's technically a monk unit as well. So I guess if you're including the Jolly, then maybe you could justify a C, but I think a C- is more fair. And now let's look at their game plan. Now that we've seen all this other information about the Songhai, how do I think they would actually work in practice? Well, in early game, I give them a B. They have an all but generic Dark Age, which sucks, but they do have a very solid Feudal Age. They have scout rushes, they have camel rushes, if that's a thing. They have good water rushes, and your economy can really start to crank up if you can replace drop camps with markets from Feudal Age. Mid-game, though, that's when the Songhai should shine. It is an A. Not only do they have great mounted options, buffed up by Gambesons and Balema, but they also have a huge spike on water thanks to early shipwright if you're playing a water map. Their eco hits its peak because you have markets, you have the Jolly, and also Bowsaw. While you miss the Bowsaw, it doesn't quite hurt as bad just yet. And so mid-game, you're in a great position. You can play Knights, you can screw around with Genitors. If your enemy is doing Knights, you have an easy response in Camels. You can do crossbow play without any problem at all. The world is your oyster in mid-game. But in late game, things go back to a pretty average B. So not only do holes start to form in your eco, but trash wars are also a bit rough. After all, like I said, you miss Bowsaw, but also you miss both the Hussar and the Elite Skirmisher. Your Halberdiers and Genitors are great, but that doesn't mean that trash wars are going to be easy by any means, especially with your wood eco hurting. Your cavalry, however, is still awesome, and your water is still very strong despite the wood problems, both of which are especially good on defense thanks to Hikoi, and in certain maps where like there's only a little bit of water and your aura can hit farther with Hikoi, those docks are really going to make a big difference in water fights. So overall, I'd say the late game is really winnable, but it has holes in it, and it can be exploited by a clever opponent. Overall, beyond just specific ages, more broadly, I'd say the Songhai's wood issues stop the market bonus and water from being as oppressive as they otherwise might be. The wood issues are like the main problem with the Songhai overall, so trying to find a way to overcome that is going to be really important. They have a very good tech tree. They have almost fully upgraded Arbs, Champs, Halbs, and Siege Onagers on top of their monster stable. So they have a lot of really good rounded unit options, especially while you still have gold available. They also have great counter unit options in general, especially before you're out of gold, because if you have your awesome camels, you got your great Genitors, which are more expensive than Elite Skirmishers, so it's not like a strict upgrade to those in any way. And lastly, the Songhai are quite micro-intensive. Not only do you have a big focus on cavalry, which are pretty micro-intensive, but you have units that have a lot of focus on bonus damage, which requires a little more micro, and a lot of different auras to juggle. Figuring out how to keep your ships near to your docks, to keep your cavalry near to your towers, to keep your Jolly in range to be relevant. These are all very micro-intensive things, and are going to contribute to the Songhai having quite a high skill ceiling, I would guess especially in late game. However, with that, we come to the end of the design section. Next up, and last on our agenda today, are loose threads. Beginning with some uncertainties. The Jolly, to start with. I'm not super happy with how it was implemented. It's too important not to include. Anyone who says they don't belong, you're silly. But I really wanted to give them a way to have both eco and military applications. The 2 auras thing isn't even something I necessarily hate. I'm pretty sure there will be an official thing someday that has 2 auras. I just feel like there's a cooler way to do it that I'm not quite seeing. And I just also really wanted to make sure they weren't busted with archers, because I like them having an attack bonus, but for archers, especially because they're like a fragile aura unit that wants to sit in the backline where your archers are, I think it would just be too much. Secondly, the water balance, I think, is a little too oriented towards late game. I really want to give them a powerful and unique niche on water throughout all stages on the game, but especially early game. And right now, you have faster building docks, which is nice, but doesn't really feel enough. And the only really good early game water ideas I came up with felt a little weak or generic. Plus, the civilization felt strong enough, I didn't want to give it too much more. So I'm not really sure on the water balance. Also, it does have a lot of auras. You have the Waraguzenyi, you have Hikoi, you have the Jolly. There are 5 different auras to worry about on this civilization, and I love auras, don't get me wrong, and obviously I'm going for feasibility here, and 5 auras is feasible, but I think I'd like to cut maybe 1 or 2, if possible. Nextly, the Waraguzenyi does feel a little off to me. I like the ability a ton, right? But the stats I feel like are a little generic, and I wasn't really sure how to give them a better, more fitting niche that didn't just feel completely ahistorical and made up. And lastly, there are a couple of high priority regionals that I really strongly considered. For one, the Caravanserai. I talked about that a lot on my Mountain Royals remake. You can take a look at that up here. Maybe instead of that, it could have been a new regional building called an Oasis, but that felt really forced. So I just wanted to give them more trade stuff. And the other one is a new regional tech that I really strongly considered called salt mining. And this would be effectively the Pole's gold trickle while mining stone, but you had to research it and it would be made available to many civilizations, including the Poles. Salt mining was way more important to West Africa than it ever was to Poland. Didn't include it though, mostly because I wasn't quite sure exactly how to pull the trigger on it. Some alternatives that I wanted to briefly mention. In terms of early game water balance, what if the demolition raft was available in Dark Age? Just the demo raft, so you can bomb an enemy fishing fleet. I thought that could be fun. And maybe fire and demo ships costing way less wood. I felt like having them be a fire and demo ship faction would make sense because, a war canoe based fleet, those 2 ships feel the most war canoeish to me. Fire Galley in Dark Age, though, it would be insanely busted. So not that. Demo raft available in Dark Age is fine, because maybe you do 1 or 2 Hail Marys and then say whatever. Also another alternative, what if the Waraguzenyi was a good deal cheaper, but gives the enemy a gold bounty when it's killed? That would be pretty cool, but it would also be a lot to give to 1 unit, especially because I'm trying to keep it LAVAnilla here. And lastly, what if cavalry generated gold on kill instead of gambesons to show the rewards for courage that were given out to great soldiers? I kind of liked this one. This one I was close to, but I felt that gambesons played better into their overarching cavalry strategy and made their camels and their genitors more appealing. So that's why I didn't go with those. Lastly, a LAVAnte-Garde section. All of the impossible, improbable, and often idiotic, but innovative ideas that I didn't include in the build, but would if I had complete control. I'm not going to go through all of these, but to focus on some of my favorites. A knife thrower regional unit, reworking the Gabedo to make it more historically accurate. If you want to see me talk a little more about this, you can check out my West African split video up here. Another one would be making the Sahel cataphract as a knight replacement, a regional thing for a bunch of Sahel civilizations. I think that could be really, really cool. I just didn't quite figure out a way to make it work. War canoes, that's definitely a regional thing I want to do someday, but there's a lot to go into with that. And lastly, for potential tech tree ads, I thought it would be really cool to add a West African animist sorcerer that I found the word Tirke for. This could be a regional unit. They were a spiritual liaison who could be a monk variant that could block conversions and maybe have an aggressive curse sort of effect. Not because they actually could, but because they were greatly feared because of the magic they were purported to use. And that sort of fear can actually translate to real life ramifications. And lastly, a couple of tabled mechanics. The only one that I really wanted to focus on here was that destroying an enemy production building could give you a free unit that it could produce. This is in reference to something I really wanted to include but couldn't quite, wherein the SONGHAI would actually take prisoner the most brave enemy soldiers and conscript them. And they're like, no, you're cool, you're on our team now. And I thought that was so awesome. So I thought that a mechanic like that could be really fun. But didn't quite manifest, felt too complicated. And with that, we come to the end of this SONGHAI build. Thank you so much for watching. Before we end, as always, the Likeliometer. In my opinion, how likely is it that the SONGHAI as a civilization, maybe looking a little similar to what you see here, could appear in the game as we know it now? And on the Likeliometer, the SONGHAI have an 8 out of 10. I think it is quite likely we will see the SONGHAI. There are some other regions in the world I think are even more likely than West Africa, but I wouldn't be surprised if within the next 3 expansions, West Africa is something we see again. I might even go so far as to say the next 2. And if we go back to West Africa, or Africa in general, I think the SONGHAI are a top 3 civilization to be added. But that is just what I think. Now I want to hear what you guys think. How'd you like the build? What would you do differently? Do you disagree with my Likeliometer assessment? And what do you want to see me do next on this channel? But until then, my name is Robbie Howell, and ciao for now.